My channel is progressing in the opposite direction it's supposed to for YouTube. We're bringing it back to 2016 with unrelated gameplay over commentary. So I want to talk about what it actually takes to get an enemy added to a video game. The alternative title for this is Fat Shark probably isn't as lazy as you think. Come on, guys, give him a little bit of credit. So what does this process actually look like? I, over the years of making these videos, have gotten to talk with plenty of people that work in the industry and have a little bit of experience making things for games myself. So I think this is just a topic that affects a lot of us, but no one really has any context for. Okay, so to start this process, the first thing you need to understand, making content for a GW game is not like making content for any other game. Making content for GW is, for most studios, you have a liaison that you meet with once a week for about an hour every, like, I don't know what the day is. It could be any day of the week. For Fat Shark, it's probably like a Thursday or something. Point is, that's where you have to get all your ideas filtered. Now, if you're lucky and they tell you what to do, like in the case of Arbiter, Arbiter was 100% GW's creation. They handed Fat Shark a reference sheet, reference material of what their ability should be. Fat Shark had very little say in the creation of Arbiter. That's why they were able to get it done so fast. If you actually watch one of the only public interviews Fat Shark has ever done where they talk about the Arbiter, which thanks to Jefficus for bringing this to light because no one ever talks about it, they mentioned it only took them like a few months to make the Arbiter because they didn't have to go through 90% of this stupid bullshit I'm about to talk about. But I want to talk about the Plasma Gunner. What does it take to get your own idea created in a licensed game? So you have to design the enemy. Now, why do you have to design the enemy first? Because to present the idea to GW, you need to have a concept for the enemy. To have a concept for the enemy before you start getting like art and writing and voice acting done, you need to know what the enemy is so the artists and creatives know how to communicate that vision to the player. For example, the Plasma Gunner probably had 7 different rough drafts before they finally got one that they were happy with. And once you get a design, once you get the actual gameplay design down, you send that idea to an artist who starts making it come to life. And they'll make like 7 or so rough drafts. I'm also going to keep a timeline of events here so you don't get lost on how long this process should really take. So it might take you a week to go from contracting the artwork. Well, we'll say it takes 2 or 3 days to get a good solid design down for the enemy, like gameplay wise. Then you spend about a week waiting for 7 or so concept arts to come in. Then you send it to the liaison next week. So we're 2 weeks in and we haven't even started. And this is now, excuse me, GW is relentlessly nitpicky. They'll be like, okay, well, you need to add a spike here, or you need to use this shade, a different shade of black. You need to, you know, this book 50 years ago said this, so you need to make this minor cosmetic alteration that isn't even visible in gameplay. They are ultra sticklers about this stuff. And sadly, until you get this approval, you can't start the next part, which is voice acting and sound engineering. You can make some sound engineering, but why can't you do voice acting? Well, to do voice acting, the voice actor needs to know what to say. And for them to know what to say, you have to write lines down. So to write lines down, you need to know what enemy it's going to be. And why do you need to know all this first? Well, let's say tomorrow. Let's say the day after you unveil the enemy, the Game Workshop plans on releasing a new book that shows a deeply corrupted Chaos Guardsman Plasma Gunner killing a Space Marine. And he's like a new model refresh on an old-ass model or whatever. He's a new product line. But let's say your concept for the Plasma Gunner is that he's barely corrupted. He's like a regular guy that's just, you know, he's like one of the dregs instead of like the full-on like armored dudes. Well, that'll fuck up GW's upcoming product, and they're not going to let you do that. So if you started writing lines down for that type of character and contracting out a voice actor for that type of character, and then you have to stop that order before it even gets started, that's how you get a reputation where no quality voice actors want to work for you. Trust me, voice acting is a very shitty industry to be in, and it's very, like, it's all about hearsay. So if you have the reputation for constantly contracting work and then stopping it before it even gets started or pays out, you're not going to have any quality voice actors willing to work for you before long. Anyway, so you've got the concept. You sent it to Games Workshop. They nitpicked it. So you sent the concept back to an artist. They revised it. And let's say after the second revision, if you're lucky, Games Workshop has finally approved it. So now you can start writing lines. So we spent 2 weeks in the approval process for the art. Now we've got to spend maybe a few more days writing some basic filler trash lines and getting those lines voice acted. Now that you can do alongside other stuff. But we're about anywhere from 2, if you're lucky, to 3 weeks to a month if you're unlucky. I've heard some cases of this process taking upwards of 3 months. Like for Saber, sometimes, you know, because when you're dealing with Space Marines, the bar is even higher. So, by the way, Fantasy is immune to this, just in case you're wondering, because they don't give a fuck about Fantasy. Anyway. So we're anywhere from 2 weeks to about a month into this process. Now we can actually start making the enemy. Okay, now this process can take anywhere from a week, if you're really fast and efficient, to 2 to 3 months, because this is where things start getting a little bit more technical. Let's say, so now you have to, how do you actually bring concept art to life? Well, you're probably going to start with a 3D model. Now, I actually know more than I probably should about 3D modeling, making my own shit for VR chat. Not to say it's comparable with the esoteric bullshit that Fat Shark has to do with their old depreciated engine, but hey man, Blender's Blender and we're all using Blender, right? So anyway, the point is, if the enemy can't just be a copy-paste job, which thankfully the plasma gunner's just a shotgunner, so they probably got to use a rig. Now, there's 2 ways for studios to do this. If you're a smart studio, you will create your enemy categories beforehand. Monstrosity, human, Ogren, etc. Then you will create a blank, what's called a default state, a reference cube, if you will, for all my based Blender chads out there. But instead of a cube, you'll make a gray, amorphous, like, human-shaped object that is rigged. Because you got to make a skeleton, you got to rig it up, you got to add a whole bunch of, like, bones and weights to it, and it fucking sucks. That shit can take a day to a week in and of itself, if you're really going for high quality. For a high-quality studio, like Fat Shark, which I know there's going to be some shitty, annoying people that are like, you think Fat Shark's high quality? Listen, motherfucker, when it comes to 3D modeling, Fat Shark, for the resources they have, are some of the best in the business, okay? Anyway, if you're smart and gunning for quality, you're going to make your reference character sheet, which is basic, or your reference, like, character in Blender, which is going to have your skeleton, your rig, and you're going to assign one person to the head, one person to the body, one person to each arm, one person to the legs, etc. And the bigger the studio, the more subdivided this is. One person just does the hand, one person does the forearm, one person does the upper arm. Fat Shark is probably doing it where they're condensing the work into one person covers multiple parts of the enemy. God help me if I upload this video and get a DM like, oh no, actually they just make me do the entire enemy. I would actually cry for that person. But anyway, so making the rig, making the skeleton, rigging it up, getting all the bones correct. So just creating your template probably takes a while. So if you're smart, you'll have already made the template beforehand. And then you're just going to readjust that template for every new enemy. Okay, but that was explaining both processes. Whether you had to make the thing, if you have to make it from scratch every time, you're adding like an extra month to an extra 2 weeks or whatever onto the project's time just by default. But anyway, so you take your default state, your gray humanoid. Now you need someone to make the armor, someone to actually like texture the body, make skin. Dude, skin is fucking hard. Faces are even harder. It probably takes Fat Shark, I'd say maybe like a week to actually like texture out the character and get all the detail for like the body and stuff. And then they have each person probably spend a week all simultaneously making the armor, 3D modeling it. And then because they're a small studio, they probably only have like 1 or 2 people doing texture work. So they probably have someone texture the body while the armor's getting made. And then once the armor's made, they have them go and texture each piece of that. And I would say each of these steps takes about a week. It takes about a week to make the armor and do the body texturing. It takes about a week to do the armor texturing. Now, it could take longer. This is, like all artistic pursuits, it's very, like, you know, it's very, like, wishy-washy. Sometimes you will try to texture like skin and you just have no fucking idea how to make like the crevices and scars like look exactly right and not like they're flat and lifeless. Because remember, all of these textures are 2Ds. These aren't 3D textures. So the fact that they look like they have depth is a fucking miracle of talented artists. It's a flat 2D image wrapped around a 3D model. So when texturing gives you the illusion of depth, that shit is not fucking easy, dude. Anyway, once you've done the artistic thing, so we'll average it out. We spent a month designing it. Now we've spent maybe a month or so actually doing the creative things. Now, while you're doing the creative things in the background are happening. Voice acting is going to be taking place during this time. You're going to have, you have a whole sound engineering team. You're going to have voice actors record lines. You're going to have an audio engineer mixing those lines. Fuck you, by the way, if you're a studio that requires voice actors to mix the lines for you. Go fuck yourself. This is not very common anymore, but there used to be a time when to be a voice actor, you also had to know how to edit your voice as well. Go fuck yourself. Anyway, sorry, I just had to slip that one in there for the 2 people that will hear that and be like, yeah, that did suck. Anyway, so now the concept and approval stuff is done. Now the artistic stuff is done. The other thing that's happening during the artistic creation process is you're going to want to actually make the enemy as we know it. Because to us, we don't really see 90% of that process I just talked about. For us, all we know is, wow, this enemy is strong. Wow, they just blasted me and destroyed my toughness. How do you do that? How do you make an enemy get to that stage? Well, there is what's called a combat designer. There's a game designer and a combat designer. The game designer usually is the person that's making the overlay. This is how we want combat to flow. This is how we want the general. We want this game to prioritize, it's more about resource management rather than straight combat. The moment-to-moment gameplay is blah, blah, blah. They're the big picture people. But then you also have a combat designer. And that's usually who you're going to talk to at this stage. They're going to their job is basically just know the sandbox, know everything in the sandbox, know how everything interacts, know the vision of the game designer, what are you trying to achieve. And the combat designer, it would be his job to say, you know what we need in the sandbox? We don't have a way to counter when players stack bubbles and gold toughness. So we need a way to pop those things because people have on average gotten too good to deal with that in melee. So overheads and the snipers and the like are not enough anymore. Okay, so Plasma Gunner is a perfect fit for this. They probably wanted a way to counter gold toughness and bubbles anyway, and Plasma Gunner just fell on their lap. That's usually how good games are made. Anyway, so they'll come up with that idea. But their initial idea might not be good. Their initial idea might be look at how much the Plasma Gunner's already changed, and we're going to talk about how that happens here in like 2 or 3 minutes. But anyway, so once they've got that idea phased down, they start making the numbers. Well, we know the average gold toughness player, and they have telemetry data for all this shit. We know when a player has gold toughness, the average amount of toughness they have is whatever number they pull from telemetry to figure that out. Because trust me, that shit is all being saved and recorded and aggregated to help with these balancing decisions. The days of the rockstar game designer who just knows every little detail and only makes information, he only makes changes based on that, are long over. It's your job to know everything and also use the data that's provided to say, okay, the Plasma Gunner needs to do exactly 200 damage per hit, sake of the argument. Now, this is also the people that will come up with special rules, like they should never do damage to health when you have toughness, etc., that kind of shit. So once they create a rough draft of what it's supposed to do and they have a general outline for the numbers, this is where you also start getting coders involved and they start actually making the things. They take, say, the plasma projectile. So you go back to the artistic people. Hey, have you created a plasma projectile yet? No? Okay, cool. So here's what you usually do. You drop the enemy in a testing environment, and this is your initial, this is what's called an alpha. By the way, if you want to know the difference between alpha testing, beta testing, and release, here it is right here. Stop getting fooled by beta tests that are just actually demos. Right here. So an alpha phase of an enemy is when you have the enemy not even anything made. You take that reference, gray amorphous enemy, and he's shooting literal blocks at you in a testing environment. You have that, and you just go like, okay, let me just load in and let me see, does this feel good if he does 200 damage a hit? No, I'm seeing that actually, because people don't have gold toughness up that often, just running around, this doesn't feel good. Okay, let's tweak this to 180. This is where you start doing that kind of fine-tuning of, like really nailing down what you want it to be. So, next comes the refinement phase. Once the artists start, you know, actually making the enemy come to life, the designer should have probably figured out the rough idea of what feels good to play with, where the balance should be, how much the exact numbers should be. Once you have an actual enemy made, once you have the baseline coding done, once you have that stuff done. Now, I haven't talked too much about coding because I really don't know much about the coding side of things. I'm more like creative design kind of stuff and making 3D models. So what usually happens is while that model gets finished, it gets handed off to people that actually make things run. Now, this is another part that is completely dependent on what's called like bloat and work overhead, which is just, did the guy who worked here 5 years ago create like a baseline repository that if I pull, let's say the function that dictates toughness going down, when they made this, did they make it in a way that's friendly to be pulled to a projectile that hasn't existed yet? Or am I gonna have to make some rickety ass like architecture registry or whatever the fuck, you know, some like rickety ass code base that is going to enable this function to interact with this function? Because if you just pull directly from a function and try to make it do something like a new addition, you can add one line of code to that function and 500 lines of code that aren't even related to toughness can break. No, I'm not even joking. That people like to make fun of this or say this ironically. I am saying this with 100% sincerity because I've made mod for Bethesda games, and that game is usually like, those games are usually fairly easy to mod. They're not nearly as hard to make things for as Darktide is. And, like, I'll add, like, a new, like, basic line. I'll try to change a very basic idea. And, like, it will break something fucking, you know, that I didn't even know was in any way related to it. So, it might take you, and you can't start really, you can lay the foundation for this code shit early on, but a lot of the like actual fine making has to come after the character's been made for a lot of the time. So this will then lead you to where you have to get approval. That takes about a month. Make the enemy as like artistically. That takes about a month. And then you start coding. I did not think this was going to run on so long. Jesus Christ. And then, while you're doing all of that, you start coding the actual gameplay elements of the enemy so that when you drop them in the game, things don't fucking explode and break and crash and all that. So once you've done that, which a lot of those three things generally happen in tandem, you're about, we'll say, anywhere from a month, month and a half, to, at the later stages, 3 to 4 months in. So you drop the enemy in for alpha testing. The alpha testing usually happens before the artistic people are done with their job and while the early coding is still happening. Usually an alpha enemy is going to be like gray and shooting blocks at you, and you're going to do like, you know, you're going to get that really core foundation. So from there, you move on to beta testing. Beta testing is when the actual thing is made. Like, the artistic side is basically done. The enemy is mostly coded, but there's still a lot of refinement work left to do. Now, beta testing is usually done privately, invite only. This is where Darktide would, you know, create a test server and let people test things. And these people will always know more than you. It doesn't matter if this game is your job. There's always going to be someone like me who is going to run circles around your designer in just general knowledge. You know, someone like Reginald, for example, as well. If you think this is just ego, no, I can probably name like 20 people, like Cooley, like Dorn, etc., that they could run circles around the entire Fat Shark design team in terms of just how well do you understand the game. Which, by the way, just as a side note, since we're already way over time, that's why bugs happen and aren't. No game developer sets out to make a bad game, okay? Let's just understand that. When a bug goes unfixed for a long time, a lot of the times it's because they just don't know it's a fucking bug. because you do the beta testing, and this is where community manager's job becomes important. You do your beta testing with the mostly finished enemy, and then you have the testers on a private realm tell you, this sucks, this isn't good, this felt really bad, etc., etc. And then it's the job of the CM to take all that feedback, bundle it up in a way that's understandable for the designer, because remember, combat designers are people like me, you know? What the fuck do I know about public relations? Have you seen my reputation? I couldn't make an average crowd of people like me if I literally tried as hard as physically possible. Okay, there's just something really unlikable about the geeky nerd who's more on the technical side of things than, you know, someone like Straw Hat who's more on like the I'm a people person side of things. So they take that feedback and they have to filter it. And this leads to the other issue. You have to hope that CM also knows the game pretty well, because they're the ones that get the final say of what feedback actually gets heard by the people making the content. So if they completely take the wrong thing from what the people doing the beta testing are saying, the feedback's going to go in the complete wrong direction. This happens a lot with Helldivers, by the way, in case you're wondering why that game keeps fucking being terrible. If you're wondering why that game keeps getting in shitified, it's because a lot of the content creator scene that's talking to the CMs directly and giving them feedback, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They suck at the game, and they're more about making things flashy and dumbed down so they can make like a new hype video of like explosion almost made it montages for people. And then the CM is like misinterpreting that feedback as the game should be even simpler and should have less depth and stuff. And like, it doesn't matter, just keep making the file size bigger and whatnot. That's how that enshittification happens. That's why you shouldn't just listen to YouTubers and streamers. Also, for all my aspiring game devs out there, feedback from everyone is valuable for different reasons. You absolutely want feedback from the highest skilled, most knowledgeable players. You want feedback from the absolute lowest skilled, least knowledgeable players. And you really want feedback from people that are making content for the game. You want all three, and each one cancels each other out. This is why the CM position is usually pretty shitty, because you have to gauge between all of this while doing a completely separate job. CMs are a little bit overworked throughout the industry. But anyway, once you've done all of this, the beta testing, the endless refinement, you've gone through all of this, if you're lucky, you're about 3 to 4 months in total. If you're unlucky, you're anywhere from like 6 to 7 months in, because you'll have multiple projects going at the same time. And then you can finally launch the enemy in the game. And then you can finally sit back, kick your feet up, relax that the work is done, and then go on Reddit and watch how everyone calls you a fucking retard who should kill yourself for ever thinking that this trash was good enough and that you are terrible at your job and you should never make anything ever again. And that's just a very small, unstructured, rambling snippet of what it actually takes to get something added to a video game. And if you want evidence, by the way, for this, that I'm not just making this shit up, look at Saber. Saber is the other big 40K developer right now that's making like a... Because first and third person action games like Space Marine 2 and Darktide have very similar development processes. And guess what? Saber adds new enemies at about the same rate Fat Shark does. Because the process is so similar. And then look at the RTS scene. Look at how Owlcat and Creative Assembly, look at how they add content. They're adding it at kind of the same rate as well, even though their games are not super connected. There's generally the same hang-ups everyone meets, even if they're different genres with different challenges. But, yeah. That's all for my 2016 ramble over gameplay video. If this video does sort of well, I can make more of these about other topics that I know about. Okay, see you later.